Time to learn about the tools of foreign policy. This is the presentation for Learning Target 3. I can describe and evaluate the effectiveness of various foreign policy tools in pursuit of a country's national interest and in response to global events. Take a moment to review the various topics that we will be discussing in this presentation. Please note that we will focus primarily on the first and third bullet points, and we will continue to discuss the second and fourth as we move through the rest of the unit. What is foreign policy? Foreign policy refers to the actions that are taken by a country outside of its own country, typically in relationship to other countries and in pursuit of its national interest. The tools of foreign policy are the specific actions that a country might choose to use in various situations. Determining what foreign policy a country should use is a bit like putting together a puzzle. It's important to first keep in mind the facts of the world or of a particular situation at hand. What is actually going on in the world? What is happening within a particular country at any given moment? What are the specific national interests of a given country? What are their security needs? What are their economic needs? And what are their ideological interests as it connects to a particular country at any given time? How much power does a specific country have? Not every foreign policy tool is available to every country in the world. It's important to think about how much economic or military power a country actually has. Do they have technology? Are they in a position in the global community to make things happen? And do they have commitment from their people to follow through on whatever foreign policy strategies they might like to put into place? And finally, what is the perspective of those who are in positions of power about how that country ought to act? Are there deeper underlying beliefs that seem to guide how a country chooses to interact with others? Once a country has a general sense of how they might wish to interact with others, they have a toolbox of various foreign policy tools that they can use. We will consider each of these in turn, from diplomacy and talks, through sanctions, military intervention, more covert actions, trade agreements, and various types of aid. As we explore the various tools of foreign policy, continue to ask yourself, what would be the benefit or advantage of using this type of tool to meet a country's national interest? In contrast, what might be the cost or disadvantage of using this type of tool to meet a country's national interest? The first set of tools that a country has at its disposal are tools of diplomacy. In these types of tools, one country is establishing its desire to have a positive relationship by opening lines of communication with another country. One type of diplomatic talk is a summit, which is a meeting between leaders of countries meant to show common commitment to dialogue, such as this summer's summit between U.S. President Barack Obama and Russian President Vladimir Putin. It isn't always the leader of a country who is sent to visit in another country, however. Sometimes the president will send a representative on a diplomatic mission by sending someone else that's a leader in the government or other type of dignitary. Here, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry meets with the President of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. Diplomacy relies on the use of diplomats or representatives of countries placed around the world. When countries exchange diplomats, they allow representatives or ambassadors from one country to live in another. The United States operates embassies in countries around the world, including the U.S. Embassy in Beijing, seen here. The U.S. also allows embassies from countries all around the world in Washington, D.C. When a country is really mad at another country, it can express this by either recalling its own diplomats, so bringing its representatives home, or expelling another country's diplomats, kicking them out and making them go home. Another type of tool that countries can use for foreign policy are tools that involve aid, where one country is providing something another country needs, often in exchange for something that will benefit them as well. Sometimes this can be a short-term benefit, but sometimes it's a longer-term benefit. One type of aid is military aid, where countries may offer cash for weapons, actual weapons, training programs, military advisors or troops, etc. You can see in the image here the recipients of U.S. foreign military aid in 2010, Israel being the primary recipient of American military aid. Countries may also offer economic aid, cash gifts, loans, food, equipment, technology, etc. A third type of aid that may be offered by countries is humanitarian aid. If a country is experiencing an emergency situation or has an extremely low standard of living, a country may send different types of workers, doctors, food, medicine, etc. to help that country deal with that disaster, war, crisis, or low standard of living. In the United States, a lot of this is operated through the U.S. Aid organization, a specific branch of the United States government. Another tool in the foreign policy toolbox that countries can use is sanctions, which is a way to use the economy to try to impact another country. With sanctions, a country will economically punish another country to get them to stop doing something they don't want them doing. For example, the United States has historically used sanctions against Iran in an attempt to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. Sanctions typically involve an agreement with allies to stop exporting to a particular country. Often, they are refusing to allow that country to have something that they need deeply, like energy, food, medicine, etc. The United States and the United Nations have been imposing sanctions against North Korea in response to its nuclear activity for many years. Countries might also consider using boycotts or embargoes, other economic punishments. In a boycott, there's a collective refusal to purchase goods or services exported from a specific country or to participate in events held there, as in 1980 when the United States chose to boycott the Moscow Olympics in protest of the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan. The Soviet Union and other Eastern Bloc countries responded by boycotting the 1984 Games held in Los Angeles. You might also see an embargo, which is a government ban on all imports from a particular country, as in the United States embargo against goods from Cuba. Another option that countries have is the creation of trade agreements. If countries know that they want to trade with another country, they may set out to make it official by creating formal trade agreements, as in the North American Free Trade Agreement, which opened up trade between the nations of Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Countries may recognize that they need something important like food, energy, or services from a particular country. In this case, the government themselves may be the party that is purchasing the good or service from another country. More typically, however, the government is simply working to pave the way for privately owned businesses in each country to develop relationships. They may desire to have their businesses open up factories or offices in the other country, which would allow the other country to employ their citizens. They may also want to be able to sell in another country, increasing their country's business profits. Overall, trade agreements can be an effective tool for the creation of long-term relationships between countries. Finally, many countries have tools of the military that they can use. It's not always about war, though. In fact, one of the more common tools that's used by the military is what's known as a show of strength. Countries may carry out military training exercises, test weapons publicly, make declarations that they have weapons of mass destruction, or actually move military into place in order to flex their muscles and encourage other countries to cooperate with their demands. It's a little bit like a threat. Do you really want to mess with us? In war, countries may actually use their militaries or military technology to force another country to cooperate their demands. There are different types of war, however. It can be a more limited war in the form of targeted airstrikes, or it may be a broader or total war in which the entire country is involved with the conflict. War can be unilateral, one-sided, where one country decides to use their military in response to another, or it can be the action of a military alliance. Countries may choose to utilize more covert actions in dealing with other countries, meaning they're not carried out in the open. Instead, they are planned and executed in such a way that the actions themselves are concealed, or the fact that a particular country is carrying them out is concealed. Typically, these may be focused on military, intelligence, law enforcement, or executive organizations of another country. During the Cold War, the United States used more covert actions to attempt to undermine the actions of the Soviet government. Another example would be the attempts of the United States through the Bay of Pigs invasion to overthrow the Castro regime in Cuba. In considering how to deal with other countries, the last option countries always have at their disposal is in fact the choice to do nothing. Hope you enjoyed learning about the various tools of foreign policy. Next, we will continue to consider what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of using these particular tools in practice in the world. The end.